So there's much more to Linda Fairstein's story. And so this month, there has been a lot of controversy behind the airing of Ava DuVernay's When They See Us. And this has been a really, really controversial issue dealing with the prosecutor in that story. And so many people by now, if not, you'd have to look. Netflix aired a four-part series, mini series of When They See Us, dealing with the case, the Central Park Five. And so this was the prosecutor, and she's under fire right now for her role in that story, the true story of the Central Park Five. So this article is out of the Washington Post. It says there's much more to Linda Fairstein's story, but I know I've seen multiple articles about Linda Fairstein, the prosecutor who was involved in the Central Park Five case, because now New Yorkers are demanding for her background history in terms of the other cases that she's handled in courts because of her role with these five individuals that were wrongfully accused of crime that they did not commit. And so here is an older picture of Linda Fairstein at left at a news conference in New York in March of 1988. And so it says this is by a Sarah Wayman. And so she's the author of The Real Lolita. Okay, so the month of June has not been kind to Linda Fairstein, former head of Sex Crimes Division of the Manhattan District Attorney Office. Since the Ava DuVernay's limited Netflix series When They See Us debuted, it was put out May 31st. So the prosecutor turned the best-selling crime writer that she was has been now under fire for her role in shaping the prosecution of the group of wrongfully convicted teens who became known as what is called the Central Park Five. And so I know Fairstein slightly through the world of crime writing. Dutton, her longtime book publisher, and ICM Partners, her longtime agency, both have dropped her, and social media campaigns have spurred her to resign from the boards of the Victims Resource Group, Safe Horizon, and Vassar College. So Fairstein's fall is a result of a long time overdue public reckoning with the New York response to the 1989 rape and attempted murder of Tricia Miele. So the crime for which the five were wrongfully imprisoned. So, in measuring the cost of the case, it is simply that Fairstein played a role in pursuing the wrong suspects. So, it's that, as I wrote earlier this month, other women were assaulted, raped, and in one instance murdered by Matias Reyes, the man solely responsible for the attack on Miele. The New York Police Department and the prosecutor office failed these women, some of whom were attacked after Miele, because they believed incorrectly that Miele was just one victim of a crime wave taking place in the Central Park that night. And so it goes on to say that our reckoning also needs to go beyond the Central Park jogger case. Fairstein joined an unjust system in the 1970s, and at first she helped revolutionize certain aspects of that system. But as our ideas about the criminal justice system evolved, hers did not. So neither the excruciating opted Fairstein wrote in her own defense, nor Felicity Huffman's villainous portrayal of her When They See Us captures the full arc of what happened to Fairstein. and why it matters for the rest of us. So Fairstein began her career in public service on the cusp of a major change in thinking about sex crimes. So in 1972, the same year Fairstein joined the Manhattan District Attorney Office, the state of New York finally changed a long standing law that required sexual assault victims to have at least one witness who could corroborate the identity of the assailant. So in 1974, the state also dropped the requirement that another witness corroborates the nature of the attack. So in 1971, 2,415 rapes were reported to the city, leading to a single felony rape conviction. So sexual assault among acquaintances and loved ones was hardly considered to be rape, let alone a criminal offense to prosecute. So as Fairstein told a reporter in 1990 for a profile with the headline Linda Fairstein versus Rape, if someone walked out of my office and had her purse stolen and then was raped by an assailant, her testimony would be enough to convict him of stealing her purse, but not enough of the more serious crime committed against her. So, not of the more serious crime committed against her. So, it would take until 1975 to pass New York's so called rape shield law, barring defendants from bringing up a woman's sexual history as evidence in a rape trial involving a stranger. So, it took even longer to establish that it was improper to invoke prior consensual sex between a suspect and a victim as a defense against the rape. Marital rape wasn't considered to be a crime in all 50 states until 1993. And believe it or not, so sexual assault wasn't taken seriously as a crime by the law itself. So many cops and prosecutors had attitudes that were cavalier and victim blaming at best and outright grotesque at worst. And so basically, if you were a rape victim back in that time, if you were raped by a husband or a boyfriend, you know, like it says, marital rape wasn't considered to be a crime in all 50 states until 1993. And so it wasn't taken as serious as someone who had no prior relation, intimate relations with the assailant. So thanks to the work of Fairstein and other sex crimes focused prosecutors and police officers, those attitudes began to change. So slowly, if stubbornly, the holdouts began to understand that victims should not be blamed for their behavior, that there is no such thing as a typical rape victim, and that anyone can be a rapist, not merely a random violent stranger. So these insights were critically important, but Fairstein's pursuit of justice for victims of the sexual assault didn't take into account newer developments in how we understand the criminal justice system to work or not work. The idea that eyewitness testimony is the gold standard has been disproved with every exoneration as the result of DNA evidence. So the emphasis on confessions has had to take into account the confessions that can be coerced. And so the inconsistencies, such as ones of the Central Park Five varying accounts of the evening, really do matter, and the recognition that Black and brown men and boys are disproportionately funneled into prison system made it vital that we measure justice in more holistic terms. So by the time Trisha Miele was attacked in 1989, Fairstein had long been focused on making it possible to prosecute the kind of violent, unwitnessed rapes by strangers that had so long eluded conviction. So in 1974, April, she told the Los Angeles Times that we see that the case of the girl dragged into the park by the four young men and raped. Okay, so in her pursuit of justice for Miele, Fairstein didn't seem to recognize that she herself and other prosecutors such as her could commit other injustices along the way. And so As the Rolling Stone columnist Jamil Smith rightly pointed out, that there are Linda Fairsteins in every city. So canceling Fairstein herself may be emotionally satisfying, but it doesn't account for the real change that she helped bring about. And without concerted effort and work, it won't prevent other prosecutors from making the same terrible decisions that inflicted such a dreadful cost on the Central Park Five and on Matias Reyes and other victims as well. And so that right there, I thought that story was pretty intriguing. So, it just kind of shed a little bit of light, but there's some more to this. Okay, so it doesn't end there. So I'm going to click back over so you can see that this right here says Linda Fairstein is still trying to take down the Central Park Five. So this is a day ago. The first one was 8 hours ago. So this is fairly recent. So out of the nation, Linda Fairstein, it says this is having to do with racism and discrimination. So Linda Fairstein is still trying to take down the Central Park Five. So she's using the media instead of legal system, but her tactics are as corrupt as they were in 1989. This is by Ellie Mistel. And so this was put out June 13th. And so here's the Central Park Five. You can see at least a few of them standing there as today. And so you see Yusef Salem, Kevin Richardson, and Raymond Santana, three members of the Central Park Five, react to supporters in New York in 2012. And so they've been supported thus far. So if you haven't watched Ava DuVernay's Netflix miniseries, When They See Us, or Ken Burns' documentary, The Central Park Five, you need to. Go ahead, grab some tissue. I'll wait. We Are we good? So what you just saw was a story of how gross prosecutional misconduct and racism can lead to wrongful convictions. So the story sadly is not just about the boys and about black and brown boys everywhere and the dangers they face at the hands of racist criminal justice system every time they leave their houses. There is enough villainy to go around. So the police, the media, Donald Trump, lots of society's moving parts intersect to bring injustice upon children of color. But a consistent tool deployed against black and brown youth is the prosecutor's office. You just can't miscarry justice without it. And so in the film, Linda Fairstein comes off as one of the principal villains. So she was the head of the sex crimes unit in Manhattan District Attorney's Office at the time of the attack on Trisha Meili, the woman long known as the Central Park Jogger. So it was on her watch that Antron McCray, Kevin Richardson, Yusef Salem, Raymond Santana, and Corey Wise, all 16 or under that age at the time, were rounded up. The boys were questioned without an attorney or a parent present, tricked into false confessions, and pre-tried in court of public opinion, convicted and sentenced for crimes that they did not commit. And so she, as much as any single lawyer type is responsible for the legal travesty that took place in 1989. So the Central Park Five were exonerated by the DNA evidence in 2002 after convicted serial rapist Matias Reyes confessed to his crimes. Reyes went on to attack and rape other people after the Central Park attack before he had finally been caught. And so in real life, Fairstein appears to be an even worse person than she is portrayed to be. So you think Fairstein would be inconsolable, ashamed, or just plain embarrassed when she learned that her actions not only put five innocent boys in jail, but allowed the real perpetrator to go on raping people for that much longer. But no, she is not humiliated. She is defiant. This week, the Wall Street Journal gave her editorial space to attack the Central Park Five once again. It was so on brand, very on brand for the Journal to allow a disgraced prosecutor to make a soliloquy against people of color. And that's the kind of news that we need so we can determine whether to hang on to our repentant white supremacy. So, stocks for another day. So, in her opted unmitigated scientific evidence that she prosecuted the wrong people does not stop Fairstein from insinuating that the boys still had something to do with Miele's rape. So she starts at about 9 p.m., April 19th, 1989. A large group of young men gathered on the corner of 110th Street and Fifth Avenue for the purpose of robbing and beating innocent people in Central Park. And there were more than 30 rioters, and the woman known as the Central Park jogger, Trisha Miele, was not only their only victim. So 8 others were attacked, including 2 men who were beaten so savagely that they required hospitalization for their head injuries. So do you see what she did there? Let me slow it down so that we can all experience this fetid example of opening drivel prosecutors regularly shovel at juries. So first, she put the Central Park Five with a group of young men just outside the park. And then she didn't specifically invoke their names as part of the group of young men. She can't because she can't prove that they were there. There's no physical evidence putting any of those boys outside of the park among the large gathering at 9 p.m. But we know that she's talking about Central Park 5 because this is her first sentence in her opted title, Netflix Fall Story of Central Park 5. We're not stupid. We're not stupid, right? So we're all supposed to know who she's talking about, even though she doesn't name them. And so then she ascribes a motive to the gathering and the robbing and the beating of innocent people. And then she can't prove either one of them. And there was a series of attacks in the park that night. But as we learn, she can't prove that some large gathering of young men, mostly teens, formed a common purpose outside of the park at 9 p.m. to conduct those attacks in an unprovoked fashion. Much has been written about the police misrepresentation or representation, misinterpretation. And so of the boys, use of the word whiling is what they called it. And wolf pack, they mentioned that. So which was a slang in the time for the hangout with what was called whiling, which is the term made up by police that's supposed to indicate a conspiracy to commit random acts of violence. But remember, Fairstein can't prove that the Central Park Five were part of the alleged rampage group think, even if one existed. So then she specifies in her terms, changing large group to the more than 30 and 30 young men to rioters. And so, are you frightened yet? She's counting on you to misinterpret increased specificity as additional facts. And so then she gives them a victim. Note that the first and only named victim is Trisha Miele, whom we know was not raped by the Central Park Five. Doesn't matter. Even though we know Miele was not raped by the Central Park Five, we're all now told Miele was not the only victim of the Central Park Five, whom she can't name because she can't establish that they were even there as a part of the rioting group, of course. So she's written 2 sentences, by the way, and has already subtly re-accused the boys of crimes that she knows that they did not even commit. So then she ramps up the body count. Okay, 8 victims savagely beaten and hospitalized for head trauma. Just who are these monsters? We're supposed to think who maybe didn't technically rape a woman that evening, but beat up and terrorized an entire park. So we're the Central Park. Were they the Central Park Five? No. So remember, she has no idea of who those 5 boys were while this was all going on. So it's a huge park. And so the boys claim that they were just hanging out, and she can't prove that they were part of this group of rioters either. So she can't prove that they participated in this rioting, if there was any, and has no physical evidence of them laying a hand on Trisha Meali, and can't prove that they touched any of the other victims either. So, in fact, the only thing Linda Fairstein can prove about the Central Park Five is that they were non white and in the Central Park at the same point on the night of April 19th. So, Fairstein engages in a literary slate of hand throughout her opted article. So she points out that the 15 teenagers were apprehended, among them members of the Central Park Five. So she offers this as proof that they did something when an arrest is not proof of anything. Arrest is just what it is, an arrest until they finally go through and find out if that person, in fact, is guilty. And so she seamlessly transitions from picking or nitpicking, that is, with Ava DuVernay dramatization of the story, and then attacking the innocence of the real life men. So, investigative journalist David Heath has a great thread on Twitter knocking down every one of Fairstein's unfair conjectures based on his encyclopedic knowledge of the case file. So, this is what prosecutors do. This is how wrongful convictions happen. We watch courtroom dramas and listen to true crime podcasts, and we think a trial is about evidence, but they're really about narrative. So, in this case, Fairstein has no evidence. And it also goes on to say that that the people that she's talking about were actually exonerated, which is the Central Park Five. And yet, in one opening paragraph, Fairstein has tapped into that most familiar of the tropes. And then, them black folks were guilty of something they had in common for one reason or another. And so that's quote, something. It goes in and says, it's not quoted, but that's pretty much the ideology of these people when they're trying to get a conviction, even if they have no evidence, no DNA proof whatsoever. So good prosecutors construct an argument, good writers construct a narrative. Fairstein is neither. So she's just constructing a smear. So she is attacking these men again, trying to re-victimize them after already trying to ruin their lives, and the Wall Street Journal is letting her do it in their pages. So in the courtroom, as the prosecutor, Fairstein would have to convince people that the Central Park Five were guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. But in the journal, she's managed to invert her role. So now she's the one casting reasonable doubt on the innocence of Central Park Five. So she wants to make the exilees the ones with the burden to prove their innocence all over again, basically put them through the same thing that they have been villainized by all their lives, or most of their lives. So her theory is the Central Park Five were part of a pack, which they called Wolf Pack, that participated in attacks on Trisha Miele and others, even if Matias Reyes was the only one who physically participated in the raid. So her theory is wrong, but here's the heart of her case in the opted. Okay, and so it goes on to say, Mr. Verne would have you believe that the only evidence against the suspect. This is what Linda Fairstein is basically saying. Mr. Verne would have you believe that the only evidence against the suspect was their alleged forced confessions. That is not true. There is, for one example, an African American woman who testified at the trial and again during 2002 reinvestigation, and that when Corey Wise called her brother, he told her that He had held the jogger down and felt her breast while others attacked her. So there were bloodstains and the dirt on the clothing of some of the five. And then there were statements of more than a dozen of other kids who participated in the park rampage, although none of the others admitted joining in the rape of Trisha Meili. They admitted attacking male victims and a couple in a tandem on a tandem bike ride, and each of them named some of all the five as joining them. And so this paragraph is a pile of garbage. The confessions weren't allegedly forced, they were actually forced. And so we know that because of science, we know that because of real rapists, Reyes says that he acted alone, which lines up with the fact that he had acted alone on other rapes as well. So we know that there's no evidence. Reyes knew any of the central he knew that any of the Central Park Five at the time of the attack based on a 58-page motion to vacate the conviction of the Central Park Five filed by Fairstein's boss in 2002. So we know that any confessions that are to the contrary were fabricated. And so we know that the Central Park Five's confessions contain inconsistencies with physical evidence of how the crime was committed, while Reyes' confession included details unknown to the public. And so we know that Fairstein knows that the entire theory of the case of that of Trisha Meili was that she was assaulted by a pack of boys that included the Central Park Five has been rejected by science, the real criminal, and her own prosecutor's office. And yet she resurfaces her fan magicorial theory here. So Fairstein is full of it, and she's been full of it for 30 years. If the Wall Street Journal wanted to smear these guys again, they would have just let Donald Trump do it. So at least that would have distracted from the ruining of the rest of the country for a day. So I no more questions for Linda Fairstein. It's above me now, but I do have questions for New York State Governor Andrew Cuomo. If Cuomo can pull himself away from laughing at Bill de Blasio presidential campaign long enough to look at other train wrecks, in March he signed the bill creating a prosecutorial review board empowered to review misconduct in the district attorney's office and impose sanctions. So naturally, it being challenged by the district attorney. So the bill is a good first step. But until we see whether it has any teeth, it seems inadequate to deal with the problem. Linda Fairstein is not the only prosecutor to put innocent people behind bars. She wasn't even the only prosecutor in this case. So Elizabeth Lidera was also a trial prosecutor who presided over this tragedy. So she was every bit as complicit with it as Fairstein was, and thus far has been every bit unrepentant. So she was quietly teaching at one of the best law schools in the country, Columbia Law School, until this week when the shame of all of this, it had all finally forced her and Columbia to part ways. So after leaving the prosecutor's office, Fairstein became a crime novelist. And I guess the Central Park Five case was a good training for her in that art of making stuff up. So since the release of When They See Us, she's been dropped by her publisher and removed from the board at Vassar's College, I believe at the college. And so, but she's not in jail. That's the thing. Should she be? Well, I'll let you be the judge of that. So Ladera won't be going there either. So documentaries and miniseries that state review boards are great for bringing about social shaming, but people like Fairstein will not truly pay for their crimes until we make what they did crimes. which it is a crime, is what she did. So otherwise, they'll keep doing it over and over again. Fairstein is quite literally continuing to try to prosecute the Central Park Five in the media, and she used the legal system to destroy their lives of five people, and somehow the legal system still protects her from justice instead of protecting the Central Park Five from her or the Wall Street Journal. So a good faith prosecutorial mistake is a tragedy. But what happens to the Central Park Five was not done out of an ambiance or, or abundance of good faith. So Fairstein continued attacks against them to prove her lack of good faith. But what she did to them, what she keeps doing to them, is not an accident. It is a crime. And so that is very true. And so I wanted to add that pretty soon, Yahoo, it's not Yahoo, it is, I believe, maybe Google Hangouts, will eventually cease well, I guess they want people to actually use their webcams. And so some people, it's like kind of like a little bit invasive for some people. So um, I thought this case was pretty interesting. I did see the movie, and I feel like this what this lady did, this prosecutor Linda Fairstein, or the ex-prosecutor, I believe she should be brought to justice in her role of ruining the five lives of these young males. You know, they spent most of their life incarcerated. You know, most of the prime years of their life incarcerated, and so if you just bring it back to when they were younger, where could they have gone further in their life had they not have to succumb to all of this? And so this is the thing we should be talking about. I think more conversation should be put out there about these prosecutors, not just Linda Fairstein, but these people who use the justice system to twist it, to use it for their own malicious tactics and for their overtones of racism, to use the legal system that protects them against people who are innocent, black and brown people who are innocent, that have nothing to do with these crimes that they somehow muster up in these courts. And they put pin cases on people, innocent people who haven't had any dealings with any criminal activity in terms of having to be prosecuted on that long length of stint and having to ruin your life. You can't vote. You can't almost can't live anywhere because if you go to a job, it affects you on trying to find jobs. It affects you in a lot of ways when you are somebody that has done time in prison or a facility and you come out into the world and you're trying to get your life back. And so you also have to learn what is the new things that are out, the clothes, the cell phones, the computers, a lot of time lost. And so not only just the civil suit, but also there should be a conviction against Linda Fairstein for her role in ruining the five men's lives. And so this is the kind of thing that people need: real prosecutors that are not going to falsely blame and accuse people simply solely because of the basis of their skin color or their background, using that against them. And then the fact that they're not really knowledgeable about law tactics that are unfair, of course, to use that as to demonize people and to bring them to an unfair decision of justice. And so, with that being said, I'm going to let this video go, but this is really sad. It just really sheds light on what has always been said, even in the 80s, before the 80s, when people were saying that the justice system doesn't work for people of color, it works against them. This is one of many cases that proves that statement to be true. So, in exiting this video, see you later. Like, comment, subscribe, and thank you for listening.